I said, this is one of the biggest gaps between the best and second best player we've ever seen, talking about A'ja Wilson in the WNBA. And I'm confused because I'm seeing fans bring up Caitlin Clark. Like, don't get me wrong, she's really good, but she's barely the best guard in the league, let alone the best player in the league.
All the MVP candidates on points generated per game, points scored, points generated, and by assists. Now, as you guys can see here, Caitlin Clark got hurt at the beginning of this season, but she's doing this with only 31 games. So when we sit up here and say Caitlin Clark is not the greatest, at least right now.
For 3 straight years, one conversation kept ending the same way. You'd run through the numbers, you'd make the case, and then someone would remind you, A'ja Wilson is still right there. She is too dominant, too proven, too everything. And every year, that argument held up. But right now, in the final stretch of the 2026 WNBA season, something is shifting. The numbers are moving, the rankings are moving, and Caitlin Clark, averaging 21.9 points and 8.3 assists per game over 30 games, leading the entire league in dimes, sitting on a 22-12 record with Indiana, is no longer just in the conversation. She is the conversation. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what she has done to build this case, why A'ja Wilson's grip on the #1 spot is loosening for the first time all season, and what has to happen over the final weeks of this regular season to determine whether we are about to witness the most significant individual award flip in WNBA history. And stay with me because at the 10-minute mark, I am going to show you the one number that almost nobody is centering in this debate, and it is the number that I think ultimately decides the whole thing. Let's build this story properly because the 2026 MVP race did not start where it is right now. It started with A'ja Wilson as the prohibitive favorite and Caitlin Clark as the interesting storyline that probably would not get there. Wilson came into 2026 as a 4-time MVP. She won it in 2020, 2022, 2024, and 2025, 4 times in 6 seasons. She had just come off a 2025 season where she averaged 23.4 points and 10.2 rebounds and led the Las Vegas Aces to their 3rd championship in 4 years. Before the 2026 season even tipped off, Wilson had already been given a supermax contract. The general managers surveyed by the league picked her for MVP again. DraftKings opened her at plus 220. FanDuel opened her ahead. The narrative was settled before a single game was played. Clark, meanwhile, was coming off a 2025 season that nearly broke her. Quadriceps issues. A groin injury. She played 13 games. 13 games in what should have been her breakout sophomore season, and she was shut down entirely before the postseason. She opened 2026 with something to prove on a level that almost no elite player in recent WNBA history has had to confront. And here is the fascinating part. She came out proving it. She came back healthy. She came back sharper. And game by game, week by week, she started making this race something that was supposed to be boring into something none of us can look away from. Here is the first thing you need to understand about what Clark is doing statistically, because the raw numbers undersell how unprecedented the combination actually is. She is averaging 21.9 points per game through 30 games. That ranks 3rd in the WNBA. She is averaging 8.3 assists per game. That is 1st in the league, and it is not close. Now, here is the part that makes this genuinely historic and not just impressive. If Clark sustains her current numbers through the end of the season, she will become the first player in WNBA history to lead the league in assists while ranking in the top 3 in scoring in the same season. That has never been done, not by Diana Taurasi, not by Cheryl Swoops, not by Cynthia Cooper. Nobody in the 30-year history of the Women's National Basketball Association has ever put together that specific combination of playmaking volume and scoring volume simultaneously. And it is not a 1-week sample size. She has done it across 30 games, missing 4 due to injury. She has 19 career games with at least 25 points and 10 assists, which is more than double the number anyone else has ever put together in the entire history of the league. In 2026 alone, she already has 7 such games, more than any other player has across their entire career. That is the kind of statistical separation that forces the MVP conversation to stay open no matter who else is on the ballot. The most direct NBA comparison to what Clark is doing right now is peak Nikola Jokic in terms of the dual-threat playmaking and scoring combination, except Clark is doing it in a league where that combination has literally never existed at this level. The historical weight of what she is building in real time is not being given enough airtime, and that changes right now. But here is where the argument gets more complicated, because the numbers are only half the story. Now let's look at Aja Wilson's side of this, because the strongest counter-argument deserves to be treated seriously rather than dismissed. Wilson leads the entire WNBA in scoring at 25.7 points per game. She leads the league in blocks. She ranks near the top in rebounds. She is doing all of this in a modest number of minutes per game, which means on a per-minute basis her efficiency is even more remarkable. The Las Vegas Aces are right there in the standings, and Wilson is the reason why. And here is the thing you cannot ignore. Voter fatigue is a concept, but it is not a guaranteed force that overrides legitimate greatness. If Wilson is still the most dominant individual player in the league on both ends of the floor, and statistically right now she is still making that argument, the voters who have given her 4 MVPs are not going to suddenly stop seeing it. There are real analysts and writers who have looked at this race all season and said plainly that Wilson is still the right answer. Sports Illustrated at one point had Clark falling to plus 1,000 in the odds as Wilson pulled away. The Sporting News mid-season MVP ladder had Wilson firmly at the top. And the counter-narrative on Clark is not nothing. Her defense is still a legitimate weakness. Her turnovers, she leads the entire WNBA with 79 on the season, an average of 4.6 per game, are a real problem that voters have historically held against point guards seeking MVP consideration. And here is the rhetorical question you have to sit with. If the Fever are winning games even when Clark does not play, as they went 3-0 without her in stretches this season, what does that tell you about her actual impact on team outcomes versus her individual stat production? That question does not disqualify her, but it is exactly the question that MVP voters will be asking, and the answer matters enormously. Here is where the big picture of this race comes into focus. And this is what I want you to really think about because it connects everything. Remember that hidden stat I teased at the beginning? We are almost there. The Indiana Fever are 22-12 going into the final stretch of the regular season. They are positioned as a top 3 seed in the East. Clark is averaging a career-best 21.9 points per game, a career-best assist total per game that leads the league, and her Fever are running the best offensive rating in the WNBA. Now, the closest historical parallel for the kind of MVP campaign Clark is building is actually the 2009 Diana Taurasi season, where Taurasi put together a similarly unprecedented dual scoring and playmaking season for Phoenix, and won MVP in a race that many people expected to go to an established veteran champion. The circumstances are not identical, but the structure is similar. A transcendent offensive performer making history in a way that forces the voters to reckon with what the award is actually for. Is it for the best player? Is it for the most valuable player on the best team? Is it for the person who has changed the entire sport? Because Caitlin Clark checks the third box in a way that nobody else on this planet does right now. And that factor is impossible to quantify in a traditional stat sheet, but it is very real. Former NFL star Robert Griffin III publicly put Clark at the top of his MVP rankings after she dropped 29 points and 10 assists on the Dallas Wings in a 98-87 Fever win just this week. Clark scored 26 points to go with 10 rebounds and 10 assists in her 4th career triple-double just a few weeks earlier. Her last 5 games have produced averages of 29.4 points and 9 assists. That kind of closing surge is exactly what decided the MVP race in 2025 when Wilson dominated the second half of the season to win. And right now it is Clark who is dominating the second half. Now let me show you what almost nobody is connecting. Here is what everyone is missing in this conversation, and I mean genuinely missing, not ignoring, but missing because the framing of the debate has boxed people into one set of talking points. The first thing nobody is centering properly is the injury context and what it does to the historical weight of this season. Caitlin Clark played 13 games in 2025. 13. She came back in 2026 with a full season of minutes to prove herself after essentially losing an entire year of her athletic prime to injury. The player who is putting up these numbers right now, 21.9 points, 8.3 assists, the WNBA's first ever potential top 3 scorer and assists leader in the same season. is doing it in year 3 of her professional career after year 2 was almost entirely taken from her. The compactness of what she has accomplished in effectively 2 full seasons changes how you think about the trajectory. Voters who look at career narrative as part of the MVP calculus, and some do, have a storyline here that writes itself. The second thing nobody is connecting: Kelsey Mitchell. Mitchell is averaging 24.3 points per game this season, which is actually more than Clark's scoring average. And Mitchell is a huge reason the Fever offense is operating at the efficiency level it is. But the reason Mitchell's numbers are that high in the first place is Caitlin Clark drawing defensive attention, creating space, and generating the ball movement that allows the whole system to function. Clark's 8.3 assists per game do not just reflect her playmaking, they reflect the fact that she is actively making every other offensive player on the Indiana Fever better. Think about what it means that the Fever have both the best offensive rating in the league and a secondary scorer putting up historic point totals on the same roster. That is not a coincidence. That is Clark's playmaking creating an ecosystem. And when you give the MVP to the player who creates that ecosystem, rather than just the player who scores the most points in it, you are making a statement about what the award means. That question is the real debate, and the comments section below is about to tell me exactly where you stand on it. My verdict on this race is clear, and I am going to commit to it fully. Caitlin Clark should win the 2026 WNBA MVP. And before you stop the video, hear me out on why, because I am not saying this because of narrative, and I am not saying it because of popularity. I am saying it because of the specific combination of what she is doing statistically and what it means for the sport. First, no player in 30 years of WNBA basketball has done what she is doing right now by leading the league in assists while ranking in the top 3 in scoring. When a player does something that has never been done in the history of a league, that is the definition of unprecedented value. Second, the Fever offense is the best in the league this season. Not the second best, not top 5, the best offensive rating in WNBA history through this point in the season, and Clark is the engine that makes it run. Third, her closing surge is the best in the league right now. The player who makes the most compelling statistical argument in the final weeks of a WNBA season historically wins the award. We saw Wilson do it in 2025, and right now that player is Clark. Now, the strongest counter-argument is Wilson's scoring dominance and her two-way impact. Wilson guards elite players on defense every night in a way that Clark does not. Wilson's scoring volume is higher. The Aces have been right there in the standings all season. I hear that argument, and I respect it completely, but I still disagree. Because the MVP award, at its best, should go to the player who is doing something the sport has never seen before in a season where her team has legitimately competed at the top level. Clark's combination of scoring and playmaking is unprecedented. Her team is 22-12 and challenging for a top seed. And her final weeks look like a player who knows exactly what is at stake and is refusing to blink. So I want to know from you, is Caitlin Clark the 2026 WNBA MVP, or does A'ja Wilson hold on and win a record 5th award? Drop it in the comments right now. I want to see the split. Here are my 3 predictions for how the rest of this plays out. Prediction 1. Caitlin Clark finishes the regular season leading the league in assists and ranking in the top 3 in scoring, making her the first player in WNBA history to accomplish that combination. Time frame: end of the 2026 regular season. Confidence: high. The gap in assists is large enough and her recent form is strong enough that barring a significant injury, this happens. Prediction 2. The MVP race comes down to the final week of the regular season, with Clark and Wilson separated by less margin than any 2-candidate race has been in the last 5 years. Time frame: final 10 days of the regular season. Confidence: medium. Wilson's ankle injury has given Clark's push more oxygen than it would have had otherwise, and the closing schedules and team performance will determine how tight this actually gets. And remember that number I teased at the very beginning of this video, the one I said almost nobody is talking about? Here it is. Clark's 4.6 turnovers per game lead the entire league. If you adjust her assist to turnover ratio against Wilson's, it is not as clean as the headline assist number makes it look. MVP voters have historically punished high turnover guards. The question is whether they punish Clark enough to cost her the award in a race this close, or whether her unprecedented scoring and playmaking combination overrides it entirely. That is the hidden variable nobody is building their hot takes around, and it is the one I would watch most carefully as the votes are being cast. Prediction 3, the bold one. Caitlin Clark wins the 2026 WNBA MVP and becomes only the second player in league history to win both Rookie of the Year and MVP within their first 3 seasons, joining a group that starts and essentially ends with Candace Parker's historic 2008 campaign. Time frame: end of season awards. Confidence: low to medium, intentionally bold. The gap between Clark and Wilson in the eyes of traditional MVP voters is real and may not close completely. But the momentum is undeniable, the historical weight of what she is building is real, and the final weeks are trending exactly in her direction. Here is what to watch over the next 10 to 14 days. The biggest games remaining on the schedule for both teams are against each other and against top seeds, and the results of those matchups will be the last piece of context voters have before making their decisions. Watch Wilson's return from the ankle injury specifically, how quickly she comes back, how she looks when she does, and whether the Aces hold their position or slip. If Wilson returns and immediately looks like herself and the Aces stay right there in the standings, her case gets stronger in the final stretch. If she misses additional time and the Aces fade even slightly, Clark's push becomes even harder to deny. Also watch Clark's turnovers in the final 10 games. If she tightens that number up, even from 4.6 down to 3-point-something per game, the last remaining statistical knock on her case largely disappears. And watch the Fever's seeding. If Indiana gets into the top 2 or top 3 of the Eastern Conference at the end of the regular season, the team's success argument that voters traditionally require for MVP consideration is fully satisfied. The next video is going to break down the Eastern Conference playoff picture in detail, including which team is quietly positioning for a massive postseason run that nobody is giving enough credit to right now. You are not going to want to miss that breakdown. The single most important thing to take away from this video is that Caitlin Clark is doing something in the 2026 WNBA season that has never been done before in 30 years of the league, leading in assists while ranking in the top 3 in scoring, and the MVP race is genuinely open in a way it has not been at this point of any recent season. If you want WNBA analysis that goes deeper than the highlight clips and actually gives you the context and the numbers to understand what is happening and why, subscribe right now. I break down every storyline every single week without wasting your time. Final question for the comments. If you had one vote to cast for 2026 WNBA MVP today, who gets it? Caitlin Clark or Aja Wilson? One name. Let's see it. The case for Clark rests on something deeper than statistics, and I want to make sure that gets said plainly before we close out. What Caitlin Clark has done to the WNBA as a product, to attendance figures, to television ratings, to the cultural footprint of women's basketball in the United States, is a kind of value that does not fit neatly onto a stat sheet, but is absolutely real. The league is in its 30th season in 2026, and it has never looked like it looks right now. Expansion teams exist because the market for the product grew. Television deals improved because eyeballs increased. New sponsors came in because the audience grew. A significant portion of all of that traces back to the moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto an WNBA court. Now, the MVP award is supposed to be about on-court performance, not cultural impact. And that is the correct framing for the award itself. But when you have a player who is simultaneously transforming the league off the court and producing the most unprecedented statistical combination in the sport's 30-year history on the court in the same season, you are not choosing between a popular player and a better player. You are recognizing a player who is doing both things at the same time at a level nobody has ever done before. Aja Wilson is an all-time great. She deserves every award she has won. If she wins a 5th MVP in 2026, nobody can say it is undeserved because her numbers are genuinely remarkable. But the most compelling story of the 2026 WNBA season, the story that decades from now people will look back on as a defining chapter of the league's history, is Caitlin Clark's return from an injury-ravaged year and her construction of a statistically unprecedented season in the process of pushing the greatest winner the sport has ever seen to the very last vote. That is the story, and we are living it in real time right now. Let me add one more layer to this that I think clarifies the entire debate and puts a fine point on what is actually at stake for the award this year. The WNBA MVP has been won by the league's leading scorer in the majority of seasons where the leading scorer and the leading playmaker were different people. Voters default to the scorer because scoring is the most visible, most intuitive measure of individual greatness. Wilson leads the league in scoring at 25.7 points per game. That is the default argument for her, and it is a powerful one. But here is what is different about 2026. The WNBA has never had a player lead in assists at the volume Clark is leading, 8.3 per game, while simultaneously being in the top 3 in points. Those two things have never coexisted in a single season, so the default voter logic, score the most, win the award, collides for the first time with a scenario where the player leading in the next most important individual category is also the third highest scorer in the entire league. The voters cannot simply defer to the scoreboard this time without also making a statement that assists do not count when it comes to the highest individual honor in the sport. And if that is the implicit message of the 2026 MVP vote, that is a message the league should not want to send. Clark is leading in the playmaking category by a wide margin. She is third in scoring. Her team has the best offense in the league and is competing for a top seed. The voters who give Wilson the award despite all of this are making a choice about what the award means, and that choice will be analyzed and debated for years. That is what makes the final weeks of this season must-watch television, not just for the games, but for what the outcome of the award tells us about how this league values different kinds of greatness. We are watching history being written right now,